Part two of our breakdown today, Brian, is the college football playoff. And it is in case you've been living under a rock for the last couple of years, it is a 12-team playoff this year. This is the first iteration of more than 4 teams being in the playoff. And therefore, it allows for a lot more leeway from us when we're filling out our bracket. And so we've got a lot of fun stuff going on here. We have, when it was all said and done, we only have a 2-team difference in our top 12, but the seeds are all over the place. That's the best way I can describe yours versus mine. But again, 2-team difference, but then the seeds are everywhere. So just to recap, in case you turned this one on instead of the one before, just to recap, your top 4 seeds in no particular order are Alabama.
You ready to just jump in?
We can definitely, you can reveal it if you want to. You want to reveal your top 4?
There's my top 4.
Okay.
So my 4 Power 4 conference champions and the seeding in which I have assigned to them. So Ohio State is my 1 seed. Alabama's my 2 seed. Clemson's my 3 seed. And Kansas State, I have winning the Big 12. They're my 4 seed.
So those are all your champions.
That's my champions.
Of the Power 4.
Yep. That's my champions.
Those are your 4. You will see a bit of a difference from mine, which is on the next slide. There we go. So my number 1 is Georgia. My number 2 is Ohio State. My number 3 is Florida State. And my number 4 is Utah.
So those are 1 conference champion that's the same.
Correct. But then, of course, a lot of ours, we had similar teams that were competing for that championship. Yes. And so therefore most likely going to get into the college football playoff. So that's why our seeds are kind of all over the place when comparing to each other, which also, by the way, leads to some very interesting matchups.
Yes.
Which I think is very interesting. We'll get into that.
Thing for me, Vince, here's an interesting thing for me. I have 2 of the top 4 seeds as having 2 losses.
Okay.
So I think Clemson loses 2 games in the regular season. I think they lose to Georgia in the opener, and I think they lose to Florida State.
Okay.
But that they get a 3 seed because they beat Florida State in a rematch because only one of their losses was to a conference opponent. I have Florida State only losing 1 game. Once I went back and redid it, I just can't predict Miami to beat them until Miami shows me something. So I only have them with 1 regular season loss, and then that's to Notre Dame, and then they lose to Clemson in the rematch. So even though that Florida State will have a better record than Clemson going into the championship game, Clemson obviously gets a top 4 seed because they win it, and then I have K-State also as being 11-2.
Okay.
So that's the interesting thing is I just, dude, I'm telling you, I've been saying it all summer. I'm going to stick with it until I'm proven wrong. I think this is going to be one of the most chaotic chaotic seasons we've ever seen because there's a lot of challenging schedules out there amongst the top teams.
Sure.
And because there is a lot more competitiveness, you use the word parity in a lot of these leagues where, like I don't think Louisville and NC State are contenders for the ACC title, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to have a say on who gets in because of teams that they knock off throughout the season. And we're going to see that in all the leagues. I don't think Michigan's a legit playoff contender. Do I think they're going to get swept by every top team in the Big Ten? That I'm not saying. So that's what's good. I don't have any undefeated teams. I have Ohio State in there at 12-1, and I have Bama in there. And Bama's another interesting one, Vince. I think I have them down as 1 loss, but I think there's a good chance that Alabama also gets in with a 2nd loss because I could see them losing two games in the conference and still being ahead of Georgia in the conference. And that's what's going to make it very interesting because they could both be 10-2. Bama would win the head-to-head, and then Bama would get in with Texas. So I have 2 for sure as having 2 losses, and I could see Bama losing a 2nd, which is, again, going to lead to just some absolute chaos and is going to explain a lot about what you and I have as far as winning the quarterfinal games. So that's my top 4. How do you see these 4? I mean, do you see these all as being like 1-loss teams?
I see. Okay, so I already said that I thought that Georgia would lose to Texas in the regular season. So there's at least one loss there. Ohio State, I think, has a pretty good shot of getting through clean. Florida State, I think it's going to depend on the Clemson. Well, I think Notre Dame beats
Did you
Florida
say
State.
you have Georgia being undefeated?
No, I think Georgia loses to Texas
Okay.
in the regular season. So they've
Okay.
got at least one loss. I think Ohio State could make it in undefeated.
You don't think that they'll be ahead of Georgia if they?
It just depends on a lot of things.
I mean,
to
if
be
Ohio
honest with
State's
you.
undefeated, I feel like they're going to be a
It
number
could
one.
be. Yeah, I mean, they definitely could.
They would have beaten Oregon twice, Penn State,
Yeah.
Michigan.
That's probably true.
But I remember I think you had said, you and I both agreed during the Big Ten thing that you saw them losing to Oregon.
To Oregon. That's right. Oregon
the
early, and then Ohio State gets the win later. Yeah. Same thing as Georgia. So they've got one loss. Florida State loses to Notre Dame, but I don't think they lose any ACC games. And then, gosh, Utah, that's a crapshoot. Like, I just think that they're the lone survivor of the Big 12.
So that's how. So you and I view the Big 12 the same way. It's last man standing.
Correct.
Not so much, you know what I mean?
100%.
It's going to be challenge.
100%. Which is why I don't know that the Big 12 champ is going to have a whole lot of say in who ends up winning the championship. But
it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. So I think all four of those teams have a loss. Yes.
All right. You ready to reveal our 5 through 12?
I'm ready.
All right. Here's my 5 through 12. 5 seed. I have Texas, the SEC runners up. I could see a scenario where Texas has 2 losses and gets ranked higher than Notre Dame. That's actually how I see this. I don't think it's going to be I'll be a little pissed about it, and I'll bitch about it at the time, if I'm being completely honest with you. But I could see Texas dropping a game in the regular season to a Texas A&M. And remember, that's actually how I have Texas season panning out. I have them winning their first 11 and then losing to A&M at the end of the year, being 11-1, and then losing to Georgia in the SEC title game. And I don't think the committee's going to move Notre Dame back up ahead of them if the game finishes like I think. But I could see a flip there between those two teams when it comes to the conference champions. I have Notre Dame in there at 11-1, Vince. Again, as we talked about yesterday, I have no clue who Notre Dame's going to lose to. No clue. I can't point to a single team on their schedule and say they're going to lose to that team. I just think at the end of the day, they're going to lose to somebody.
Yep.
And Oregon is a team to keep an eye on because I could see Oregon being undefeated going into the Big Ten title game.
100%.
And then if they are and they lose to Ohio State, they could be anywhere from 5 to 7.
Right.
The reason I have them at 7 is because I do have them losing a game in the regular season to somebody, whether it's at UCLA, Ohio State at home, at Michigan, at Wisconsin, home against Washington, somebody. I don't think Oregon's so dominant that they're not going to drop a game. And then, of course, I have them losing to Ohio State in the Big Ten title game. So I could see Oregon and Texas flipping. Texas getting an additional loss and then Oregon being undefeated to lose to Ohio State. My number 8 seed is Georgia. I have Georgia right now at 10-2, but I could see a scenario in which they're 9-3. And 10-2 Georgia could be higher than 8. But because I lean towards them potentially being 9-3, which sounds nuts, it does, because I think they're a very loaded team. But when I look at Georgia's schedule, Vince, I mean, Clemson on a neutral field, at Kentucky, at Alabama, at Texas, at Ole Miss, Tennessee at home. There's a scenario in which they could lose a third game. But I do have them going 10-2 and being a team that is an 8 seed and a very, very dangerous 8 seed. I have Penn State in at 9. I have the Nittany Lions going 10-2 this season. I have Florida State going 11-1 during the regular season and then losing their conference title game. So 11-2 Florida State behind 10-2 Penn State, just because I still don't think the ACC gets enough respect. I have Ole Miss in there as the 11 seed, as a 10-2 team, and then my number 12 seed is the Group of 5 team, Memphis. I actually think Liberty's going to have a better record than Memphis, but I think Liberty's going to get blasted this year because their schedule is garbage, and I think Memphis is going to be a much more competitive team and a team that's going to get a lot more love getting into the postseason. So that is my 5 through 12, Vince. What say you?
Well, you're going to show me a card, and you'll be able to see. No, I agree with you with your 5, 6, 7. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Or 5, 6, 7, they could kind of go in any direction, and that's honestly when we get to mine.
Five,
I've
six,
got
7, and 8 could all be like it's a crapshoot.
this
Where
is
the
what I'm saying. So 5, 6, 7 for me are similar but different order,
yeah.
right? And I could make an argument in a lot of different directions.
I
So
will also say this: I think there's going to be a big gap between 5 through 8, and then 9 through 12.
sure,
Like I think 5 through 8, there's going to be a lot of jockeying for position there, and then 9 through 11 jockeying for position there. But none of the 9 through 11 will be able to have a debate to be in through the top 5 through 8.
gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it
So that's
does.
kind of where I'm at
Yeah,
on
it
it.
absolutely does.
All right, Vince, let's go to your rankings, your seeds. There you go.
Okay, so I've got Oregon 5 because I think there's a good chance that they're undefeated going into that championship game, and then they lose the championship game. So obviously they're going to be outside looking in from the automatic seeds, but I think they're going to get the nod to have the top, the fifth seed, the top non-automatic bid seeds. So I think they're going to have a chance at that. The Notre Dame Texas debate for me was the toughest one. And to be perfectly honest with you, I think I had Texas undefeated going into the championship game and then losing to Georgia. And I have Notre Dame 11-1. So in theory, Texas would probably be ahead of Notre Dame there. My gut and just told me to put Notre Dame at 6 and Texas at 7, but I could easily make the K. I have it written down here. Texas, Notre Dame seeding, is my biggest question mark here. I, you know, I kind of went with my gut and I put Notre Dame at 6. And then, of course, Clemson. And then I've got Alabama 8. I've got Penn State 10. I've got Oklahoma State 11. And then my group of 5 is Memphis. And so basically what that means is the loser of their respective conference games, that would be Clemson and that would be Oklahoma State, they get in. And then the number 3 team from the SEC and the Big Ten, Alabama and Penn State, respectively, they get in as well. So that makes 3 teams from the Big Ten, 3 teams from the SEC, 2 from the ACC, 2 from the Big 12, Notre Dame, and then the group of 5, which is Memphis. So that's how I see it shaken out. I tend to agree with Bryan that a lot of the 9, 10, 11, 12 there's a gap. There's a bit of a gap. Although you could say Alabama, depending on how things look. I mean, you've got Alabama as a top 4
Based
seed.
on
So
how you have 9 through 11, I would say 9 through 5. I would expand
yes.
it 9 through
Yeah,
5. There
then
could be
that's
some
exactly
jockeying
what I
there.
was saying.
Right.
Yes, because I think Penn State, Oklahoma State, Memphis, they're going to be kind of an afterthought when it comes to some of this. But 5 through 9, I think you could make a case, depending on how many losses Alabama ends up having. But I still have them as the third best SEC team.
Yep.
So, and then Clemson will have, in my opinion, there's a chance that they beat Florida State during the regular season and then lose in the postseason. And so, they're going to have a couple of losses as well, but they're still going to be a really good team, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think to me, it's 5, 6, 7, a little bit of a gap, 8, 9, a bigger gap, 10, 11, 12. That's the way I
Yep.
have it. So,
Yep.
yeah, that's where we're at. So you want to go through and talk about our matchups
Let's
in the
do
first
it, man.
round and
Yeah.
who's going to win those
Do you
matchups?
want me to go through my 4 and then make my picks, and then you go through your 4? Do you want to go
Sure.
5, 12, 5, 12? Like, how do you want to do
Wait,
it?
let's go 5, 12, 5, 12.
Okay.
Let's do that. That'll be fun. We'll
Okay.
kind of just go back and forth.
So my 5 through 12 is here. We go. Hold on a second. My 5-12 matchups: Texas versus Memphis. I actually think this is going to be a somewhat entertaining game for a half.
Okay.
Because I think Memphis is going to be a score a little bit on that Texas defense early. But I think at the end of the day, Texas is just too talented, in my opinion, to really compete with, or for Memphis to compete with them. So I have Texas winning my matchup. It'll be a blowout that for at least a quarter and a half to 2 quarters is going to be entertaining. That's
Okay.
how I see that first round matchup.
My 5-12 matchup is Oregon and Memphis. And I just think Oregon, like you said, it could be close early, but I think Oregon is just going to run Memphis off the field at some point. So I have Oregon advancing as the 5 seed to take on Utah.
Yep. Mine obviously my 5 Texas wins means they get a matchup with K-State. So we're going to see a Big 12 rematch.
Oh yeah.
In the quarterfinals.
And I've got a
That's
Pac-12 rematch with Oregon and Utah.
Yes.
So
yes. So 2 old conference foes going at it in the quarters. Vince, my 6 through 11 is Notre Dame and Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss is going to be a very dangerous team. I think Notre Dame is going to be a very good team. That, to me, is going to be, in my view, the most competitive matchup in the first round.
Okay.
I just think that Ole Miss should have a very good defensive line this year. Against the Notre Dame offensive line, where do they stack up at that time? Are they a little bit? Are they a better squad? Are they more? Playing to their potential, all those type of things. Those are all question marks that go into that matchup. Ole Miss has really talented receivers. The issue they're going to have against Notre Dame is going to be the fact that Notre Dame is one of the few teams in the country that can actually cover their receivers and can actually put pressure on their quarterback. And at the end of the day, I just don't have a lot of faith in Jackson Dart to be able to outplay Riley Leonard. And that's why I think Notre Dame wins this game. I think Notre Dame's the more balanced team offensively. And playing in South Bend in December is not going to be the most ideal weather conditions for Ole Miss,
right.
And that'll help Notre Dame as well.
For the SIP. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So and so that's why I have Notre Dame Ole Miss in as my next matchup, and I have Notre Dame winning, which then puts the Irish in a matchup in the quarters against Clemson.
Okay. So my 6-11 is Notre Dame and Oklahoma State. Obviously a bit of a rematch.
This was one of the 2 differences that you and I had. We had a different Big 12 winner, but you also had a second Big 12 team getting. I just wanted to point that out. That's a big thing. I thought that was kind of gutsy, Vince, and I appreciated that. Because there's the assumption is that there's just maybe the ACC and it gets 2, and maybe the Big 12 gets 2, but they don't both get 2, and you went from both getting 2, which I hope you are correct on.
Yeah, me too. It was more of a hope, I think, than maybe reality, but also, seeding them 11th means they're the bottom seed of the Power 4 teams. You know what I mean? And so got them in, but then they're going to obviously have to face the number 6 seed, which is not going to be an easy task.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not going to be an easy task for Oklahoma State. And there's going to be, Notre Dame faced Oklahoma State not that long ago. And so there's a decent chunk of kids on this team that remember what that tasted like. And I think that's going to be part of this game as well. But I mean, at the end of the day, Notre Dame's going to have more talent than Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State is going to be playing at Notre Dame, which is going to be an awesome atmosphere in December. Finals are going to be over
that
for Notre Dame.
Would not be competitive, in my opinion.
I 100% agree with that.
Okay.
So
okay. I was curious what you thought about that.
No, I think this is an easy win, honestly, for Notre Dame when it all comes down to it, especially with them hosting and December and all of the different variables. Notre Dame's roster is just so much better, top to bottom. Top to bottom, it's just so much better. So Notre Dame outlasts Oklahoma State pretty easily in that one. And then so Notre Dame moves on to play the ACC champion. Same for you, but a different one for me, and that would be Florida State. So a rematch from about 2 months prior in the playoff.
Yeah, that would be very interesting.
Yes, it would.
My 7-10 matchup is Oregon-Florida State. This is actually a college football playoff rematch, Vince. If you go back to the first year of the college football playoff, Oregon and Florida State faced each other in semifinals, and it did not go well for the Seminoles, and I don't think it's going to go well for them again this time.
Fair.
I actually think this will be a competitive game for a while. I think there's 2 reasons that have me picking Oregon. Number one, if Dylan Gabriel is still healthy, I think he'll outduel DJ Uiagalelei. I think that Oregon has an offensive line capable of slowing down the Florida State defensive line. And I think Florida State defensively, as much as I like them, is going to have a hard time matching up with the tempo and speed of the Oregon offense for 60 minutes. And so I think it'll be a competitive game for a while, but I think by the fourth quarter, it'll be clear that Oregon is the better team. And I could be wrong. My guy Dietrich Hunter and some of you folks that live in Washington, Oregon, it's usually not the greatest weather out in Oregon either in December. it can get really cold and snowy or rainy out there as well. And I think Florida State going from Tallahassee to Eugene, Oregon could also potentially be a situation where the weather isn't in an ideal situation. And here's the other thing, too. They can get a lot of rain and snow that time of year. If it's rainy, that's advantage Oregon, who's a much better running team, in my opinion, than Florida State. And so that's just another factor into why I have Oregon winning that 7-10. And then I have Oregon in a matchup against Alabama, which that'll be one of the two best quarterfinal matchups for me, Vince.
All right. My 7-10 matchup is Penn State at 10. They're going to travel down to Texas.
The Battle of White Helmets.
Yeah. I don't think this one's all that close either, if I'm being perfectly honest. Again, big game Franklin, I don't think is going to be able to sustain going into Texas and what that atmosphere is going to be like for a playoff game. And I mean, they're so starved for, postseason success in Texas that is going to be one heck of an atmosphere down there, hosting and everything else. And look, I also think Texas's roster is better than Penn State at the end of the day. And so you just match up the coaches, you match up the roster, you take into consideration the venue. I don't think this game is all that close, to be perfectly honest with you. I think Texas wins this one going away, which then sets up a 7-2 matchup of Texas and Ohio State for me.
Vince, I think the best thing about Penn State this year is going to be their defensive line. And Texas is one of those teams that can neutralize it. And if you can neutralize that defensive line, they don't have a chance.
Right.
To your point, I think your analysis was spot on that one. My 8-9 matchup is Georgia-Penn State. This is the one game that I don't think will be competitive in the first round.
It's always against Penn State.
At all. And it's a matchup thing, Vince. Again, it comes down to me. I think Georgia can neutralize Penn State's advantages in the trenches. I think Georgia is going to be super dangerous because they are going to be the most battle-tested team in college football, and they're going to be rested because they will have not played in the SEC title game. Their last game will be against Georgia Tech. I think they're going to be very rested and very pissed, and that's going to bode very poorly for Penn State. Very poorly for Penn State. So I have this one being not overly competitive. And then that sets up a matchup, the Georgia-Ohio State matchup in the quarterfinals, which we're going to get to here in a second.
All right, so my final matchup in the first round is the 8-9 matchup, and this is a traditional postseason matchup.
Will this be the fourth? This will be the fourth time they've played, right? Or fifth? No,
it's fifth. A lot. It's a lot.
They played each other in 15. They played each other in 16. They played each other in 18, and they played each other in 17. And then this will be the fifth time Bama and Clemson have played in the college football playoff.
Right. So I've got Alabama and Clemson playing, and Alabama is going to have to go on the road to Clemson, which will be interesting. For me, in this round, this is the best matchup. Like, this is the best game for me, the way I put this thing together. This is going to be the closest game. This is going to be the most competitive game. And to be honest with you, I could see this game going either direction, but I like Alabama to go in to Death Valley and getting the W. I think at the end of the day, Alabama has a little bit more talent. I think that they're going to be able to beat Clemson. I'm not a huge Cade Klubnik fan. I think he'll do enough to get him to the playoff. All that. They're going to win a lot of games, but I don't know that I trust him in a playoff scenario, even if it's at home. I trust Alabama in a playoff scenario, even with a new head coach. And so I'm going to take Alabama in this one, which then sets up another kind of a perennial these days matchup, and it's going to be Alabama and Georgia in the second round.
I'll be honest, Vince. I in that matchup, that would be an ideal matchup for Clemson.
Okay,
of the potential teams they could face, that would be a very interesting matchup.
It's going to be the most
very interesting
matchup.
No doubt. I would probably agree with you that I'd probably take Bama in that matchup, Vince, but that would be a very interesting matchup. Yeah. Very interesting matchup.
Yeah, by far my best matchup in the first round.
So you and I both have all the higher seeds winning in round one, correct?
No. Alabama was a 9.
Oh, that's right. Yep, you're correct. So we
But
have
other than that, yes.
I have all 4 of the top high seeds winning. You have 3 of the 4. Okay.
Yes.
So let's get into the quarterfinals, Vince.
Right. Elite
So,
8. Elite
yes,
8.
sir. The Elite 8. So I have number 5. Well, you want to go the 4, 3, 2, 1? We'll go
Sure.
that way.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so I have number 4 Texas against number 4 Kansas State. I actually think this will be a gritty, competitive game. K-State always plays Texas tough. I think Chris Kleiman's a heck of a football coach. The fact that it's on a neutral field takes away any type of advantage that K-State might have in that regard. I think this is going to be a heck of a contest. I think it's going to be a much more competitive game than people think. But in the fourth quarter, Texas just has too much firepower, and they pull ahead and beat Kansas State in the quarterfinals. That is my so number 5 beats number 4, first upset from a seeding standpoint of the postseason for me.
Okay. I have number 5 Oregon playing number 4 Utah. And this is why are you laughing?
I'm going to say this ain't Mario Cristobal's Oregon team, Utah fans. I hate to break it to
Yeah,
you.
and then that's the deal. So this is a nice Pac-12, rematch, and you can get nostalgic about it. Okay, cool, fine. Even though Utah wasn't in the Pac-12 for very long, but still, it's a Pac-12
They
rematch.
certainly kicked the crap out of Oregon
Certainly
when they
did.
won the Big 12, Pac-12 together. The
But
last 2, what was it? The 2022, 21, where they beat Oregon twice.
yeah,
And once at 21, they beat them twice, including both blowout wins, including once in the Big 12 title. So
I don't see that
Pac-12 title
happening
game.
this time around. I
No.
think Oregon is the better team. I think Oregon will be much better in the trenches, which is where, of course, Utah, kind of makes their money, right? Is in the trenches and being that physical, hard-nosed team. Look, I don't trust Utah's quarterback. I don't think I ever have. He fits well into their system, but I don't necessarily trust him when it's all said and done in the playoffs. And so this is an Oregon win for me. And that means that I also have a 5 defeating a 4 and moving on to the next round.
Next round, I have number 6 Notre Dame against number 3 Clemson. And the Notre Dame has had a very good success for the most part, competitive success against Clemson in the regular season throughout their history. Obviously, Notre Dame beat Clemson both times at their own stadium, once in overtime, once was a blowout win. Clemson beat Notre Dame by 2 points and 8 points in their 2 matchups at home. So they're 2-2 in the regular season, Vince. Postseason has been a different story. Clemson has dominated that series so far. Beating Notre Dame 30-3 in the college football playoff of 2018, and then beating them 34-10 in the ACC title game in 2020. Things change this time. I think Notre Dame has the better roster. Notre Dame's going to be a little bit of payback from this matchup. I just don't think Clemson's D line is going to be very good. That's the thing that would scare me. The reason I'm higher on Clemson than most is because I think Clemson is going to be one of the best teams in the country in the trenches on both sides of the ball. They're going to be very good, and that's going to make this a competitive football game. But at the end of the day, Riley Leonard showed that he's athletic enough to give Clemson a lot of problems, and I think Notre Dame has the better skill talent. Think about that, Vince. Think about that. I think this is going to be a great game in the trenches. Notre Dame has the better quarterback, significantly better quarterback, and Notre Dame has the better skill talent. And at the end of the day, that's why I have Notre Dame beating Clemson in the quarterfinals and advancing to the college football semifinals.
Okay. So my 6-3 matchup is Notre Dame at 6, and the 3 is Florida State. So this is a rematch from the regular season, which I am also very curious to find out. We're only going to have 1 year under our belts at this point from a seeding standpoint. I am curious to find out if they try to avoid regular season rematches, if they can at all. You know what I mean? If they can avoid it, if they try to avoid it. I am curious to see that, because this is obviously a rematch, and I think Notre Dame beats Florida State in the regular season. And while it's very difficult to beat teams twice in a row, I understand that. I still think Notre Dame has the better roster. I think they're the better team. And obviously they will be more well-rested than Florida State, because Florida State has to play in the conference championship. And so Notre Dame will have, I guess Florida State will have the bye too. So they'll be equally rested when it comes to this round. I just like Notre Dame better than Florida State. I think the coaching is better. I think the players are better. I think Notre Dame wins this one. So I have number 6, Notre Dame, advancing to the next round.
I would be very nervous about having to win 2 games against Florida State.
I get it.
But I don't disagree with anything you just said. But that would make me very nervous. Very nervous. My next matchup, Vince, is number 7 Oregon against number 2 Alabama. And I'm going with Oregon here, Vince. I think that this Oregon team is a very balanced team, offensively, defensively. They've got good skill. They're good in the trenches. I really like this Oregon team. Not as much as what their preseason ranking is going in, to be honest with you, but I think this matchup looks very good for Oregon. And so I have Oregon actually winning this matchup. I don't know that Alabama's going to have the talent on the perimeter that Kalen DeBoer had that allowed him to beat Oregon twice last year in close games. At the end of the day, Oregon just couldn't cover for 60 minutes Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk and those guys. Bama doesn't have that type of firepower on the perimeter. And I think that ultimately is Alabama's undoing, which is why I like Oregon in this game. It's funny because I've said before the season starts, I think Oregon is overrated as a top 3 team, but I have them on my Final Four because, as you've said, Vince, matchups.
It's about matchups. Yeah.
Matchups matter.
Yep.
And I think, and this is where the playoff is going to be fascinating because they're playing the 2 seed, but I don't think Alabama is going to necessarily be the second best team in college football because of the way the schedules are this year and just the way that you get that seed because you won the SEC. So it's going to be very interesting. But I actually have Oregon winning this game for my 3rd straight quarterfinal upset.
Okay. My next round is number 7 Texas against number 2 Ohio State. This was a very difficult one for me, and I almost don't like what I came up with as I'm sitting here looking at it. To be perfectly honest with you, I feel like when I'm looking at the matchups, and this is where it gets in. We have a card for the Final Four, don't we?
We do.
You made one? Dang it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I can't change. All right. So I'm trying to talk myself back into what the decision that I made, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. I have.
What did you have and what do what?
So it's Ohio State versus Texas. I have Ohio State winning it over Texas. Okay. The more I look at it, the more I kind of lean towards Texas. And here's my reason why is because I think I trust Quinn Ewers more than I do Will Howard or whoever the quarterback is at Ohio State by this point in the season. I think I trust Steve Sarkisian over, Ohio State's head coach.
Vince, I don't know what you wrote down on your piece of paper, but.
Oh, you have Texas for me?
That's what you gave me when we talked.
See,
so I'm like, I don't know what this guy's talking about.
Hold on. See, I have Texas as a 7 seed.
Oh, see, there you go. Okay, yeah,
that's
yours.
Right there.
Yep,
that's
me right there. Okay,
yeah.
My bad.
You have Texas.
My bad.
Whatever. I picked Ohio State. I'm going to stick with my pick because I'm going to be that guy. I will stick with my pick. I have Ohio State beating Texas in this round, but I could very obviously go either direction with this one. This would be an amazing game to me. I think Texas-Ohio State would be an amazing game to have in the Elite Eight, and the winner having the right to play Notre Dame.
Yeah.
So
that's going to be very interesting. So my final matchup is number 8 Georgia against number 1 Ohio State. This is the worst case scenario for Ohio State. This is we're the number 1 seed and we get stuck with this. And it really comes down to, again, I just think Georgia's schedule is going to be so brutal that it's going to be hard for them to be seated higher than 7 or 8. That's my thoughts, because I think Georgia's very good this year. I don't think they're 2021 good, but I think they're very good. They're going to be so battle tested that they're going to be fired up and ready for this game. They will be coming off playing a game 8-9 days earlier against who did I have them? Penn State. So they're going to be They're already going to have one Big Ten team that they're going to take down. And I think they take down Ohio State. This game is most likely going to be played in the South, the way that the seedings are set up. And so I think Georgia's going to be able to have the advantage. I think that Georgia's D line against Ohio State's offensive line scares the heck out of me. One thing that allowed Ohio State 2 years ago to take Georgia down to the wire, because if you're a Buckeye fan, you're like, hey, man, we played Georgia 2 years ago and we took them down to the wire. And honestly, Ohio State probably should have won that game. If Marvin Harrison doesn't get knocked out of that game, I don't think they lose that game, to be honest with you. CJ Stroud was Hercules in that game, and the O-line was very good for the Buckeyes. That's not going to be true at either position this matchup. I think that Ohio State is going to be able to out-talent the Big Ten, with the exception of a road game at Oregon with Will Howard at quarterback. If he stays as the starter the whole year, it doesn't really matter to me. I do think he will. I think I said when we did our predictions that Will Howard won't finish the season as a starting quarterback, and I still kind of believe that. I still think that if they lose to Oregon, that's going to open the door for them to play Julian Sand, one of those guys. I have heard some good things about how Will Howard's performed at fall camp so far, so I at least feel there's a better chance that he stays the quarterback all year. Either way, there's a difference between Carson Beck, who I think is not an elite prospect, but a very good prospect, and whatever Ohio State's going to be throwing in a quarterback. Either a really talented freshman or Will Howard, who I just think is kind of mediocre. As you know, I'm not a big Will Howard guy. And the other thing, too, is Ohio State's best attribute is going to be, their offensive skill talent. And I think Georgia's good enough on defense to neutralize that enough to where they're going to be able to score enough. I think this is going to be a very competitive game. It's going to look way different than the game they played 2 years ago. Way different. This is going to be more of a 24-21 game because you have two great defenses against two good but not elite offenses. I think this game is going to look a lot like – honestly, it's going to look a lot like the Clemson-Ohio State game from 2019 is what I think it's going to look a lot alike. Or maybe the Alabama-Georgia championship game from 2017 where it's going to be two really, really, really good defenses. And whoever's quarterback is going to make the most plays. And at the end of the day, that's kind of where I'm going with it. Is I think Carson Beck as a returner with the talent around him makes just a couple more plays than what the Ohio State quarterback has. So I have all four lower seeds winning in the quarterfinals, which is going to be one of the giant things that's going to make the college football playoff so different from the NCAA tournament, because you can lose your conference championship and still be a number one seed in college basketball. If you're still the best team in college basketball, like, you're 30-2 and you lose the conference championship game to an ACC team that had 6 losses, they're not all of a sudden the number one seed. You're still the number one seed. In college football, just because you're the higher seed doesn't mean you're the better team. And the number 2, 3, and 4 teams, to me, will not be quite as good as some of the teams in 5 through 9 or 5 through 8. And that's going to show in the quarterfinals. And it's going to show one of the flaws of the college football playoff if you're a team that views that getting that bye as potential. But I think it's actually going to end up being one of the best things about the college football playoff.
Right.
Is that bye doesn't have as the impact that you think it's going to have. Because these other teams that we're talking about, Vince, are all going to have a game to kind of prepare for this. That first round game is going to prove to be more beneficial than some people think when it comes to the semifinals. So that's where I'm at with that, Vince. I'm going number 5 Texas beating number 4 K-State. I'm going number 6 Notre Dame beating number 3 Clemson. I'm going because the other thing is I think Notre Dame at number 6 is going to be ranked higher in the polls than number 3 Clemson. It'll be an upset by seeding, but it won't be an upset of the team. Same thing with Texas being K-State. I think Oregon being Alabama could also be another situation where Oregon is actually ranked higher than Bama, potentially, or at least real close, but Bama would then get the number 2 seed. This would be the one true upset, would be Georgia beating Ohio State, because I do think Ohio State's going to be 12-1 and Georgia's going to have at least 2 losses. And I think the Buckeyes will be favored that game and should be favored that game, but I think the Bulldogs win. That's what I have. What say you, Vince?
My last matchup is number 9 Alabama versus number 1 Georgia.
A rematch. So real quick, you have 2 rematches in the quarterfinals, right?
Rematch,
Georgia,
during
and then Notre Dame,
Notre Dame, Florida
That'll
State.
be interesting. Very interesting.
At the end of the day, I still think Georgia is the better team, and so I've got.
Can I say something real quick? You know that it is impossible. You're going to have a rematch with Georgia's going to have a rematch no matter what because they
no
play
matter where
Bama
they are.
and Clemson in the regular season. Fascinating, isn't it? So no matter what, Georgia gets a rematch in round 2 on this. I just thought that was very interesting. I'm sorry. Please continue with your Alabama versus Georgia matchup.
Nope, you're good. Look, I think for all the reasons that you have Georgia beating Ohio State, I think is what your matchup was, right? Is that Georgia's just going to be so battle tested by the time they get to this point, and I think that they're just going to be a really, really, really tough out. And I think that there's going to be some youth for Alabama that isn't necessarily used to the postseason, and I think Georgia. It's going to be a really good game, as it usually is when those two square off. But I think Georgia ends up taking it. So I've got Georgia moving on to face number 5, Oregon, in the Final Four.
Okay, so we're going there. Yeah, so that's big. So you got Georgia and Oregon
Yep.
in your Final Four game, and then
Yep.
Ohio State against Notre Dame. So I'll let you kind of do your 2 games, Vince.
That's fine.
Give me your matchup of both, and then I'll do mine.
Well, at the end of the day, this thing's about matchups, right? And I like, again, Georgia's going to be battle tested. Georgia is a very, very good football team, and they're going to be a good football team from top to bottom. Not that Oregon is not a good football team, but I think that experience matters in this matchup. I like Georgia to beat Oregon. I think Georgia's just a really good team. I would love to dive into it a little bit more specifically, but I don't want to go down that road. I just think Georgia and Oregon is a great matchup. Kind of there's going to be some differentiation of styles and some things like that. But like I said, at the end of the day, I think Georgia's the better football team. So I've got Georgia winning that game. Ohio State, Notre Dame.
Can I just say something real quick about that?
Yeah.
In these matchups, the master has always kind of dominated the apprentice. Right? I mean, Kirby with Alabama. I mean, Kirby got like 1 win late, but like overall, I mean, even last year, Alabama didn't have that good of a team, and Georgia had supposedly the best team in college football, and they matched up in the SEC title game, and Nick Saban got them again. Right? I mean, and I think the only year Georgia beat Bama, they needed a rematch to do it. In the title game because they got smacked by Alabama in the SEC title game. So to your point, we saw this 2 years ago. Dan Lanning's first game at Oregon, they got destroyed by Georgia. Now Oregon's better since then, and Georgia's not as good as then, but it's a 46-point difference they got to make up there. So I think that's the other part of it too, Vince, that helps. That is the master tends to dominate these matchups, and it's not just Nick Saban, but we've seen that with a lot of different coaches. Where the master just has a hard time, or the apprentice has a hard time, finally overcoming the master. And I don't know if Dan Lanning can do that in game 2, to your point.
The other matchup with Ohio State and Notre Dame, this is a fascinating one for me because without knowing any of the matchups, I have if I, predicting Notre Dame and all of that, before I put it all down on paper, and was able to tell who was going to play who and when and all of those different things. My prediction for Notre Dame is that they win 2 games in the playoff, and that was it, right? That was going to be their spot. And so that means it gets them to this spot, and then they lose. The difference for me now is that it's against Ohio State. Okay. And, we talk about matchups all the time. We talk about, rematches. Look, Notre Dame and Ohio State know each other pretty darn well at this point, considering they played each other the past 2 years. Notre Dame was knocking on the door the first time. They probably should have lost that game. Maybe Notre Dame overachieved a little bit in that first game. Depends on your definition, and that's fine.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. That's fine. Game 2, Notre Dame should have won that game. Notre Dame should have won that game.
Notre Dame underachieved in that game.
Correct. Notre Dame should have won that game. They didn't. Hats off to Ohio State. They went and won that game when it was on the line. They took it down the field. They did what they needed to do to win the game. I'm not saying that they didn't earn it at the end, because they did. But Notre Dame freaking earned it for 3.5 quarters, and they lost. Okay. It's not sour grapes. It's just an analysis of that game. If they face off again, I just don't see how Notre Dame can lose that game again. I just don't. And that's why when we talk about how important matchups are, that's how important it is that Notre Dame played Ohio State the last 2 years. This would be the third year in a row.
Third
They're
time's a
not.
charm, basically, is what you're
Yeah, I
saying.
mean, look, they're not going to put Ohio State on a pedestal, I think, like they did in year one, right? I just don't think that's the case. This is a team they know they can beat. There's going to be a mental edge for Notre Dame at this point if they play them a third time. And you throw in the fact that this is an opportunity to get to the national championship game and everything that goes along with that. I can't choose against Notre Dame here, even though, like I said, I think realistically, depending on matchups and all of that, I think, I predict Notre Dame to win 2 games in the playoffs. This is where they would lose. But if they're going to play Ohio State in this game, I think Notre Dame wins. And that's why I have Notre Dame moving on. So this is not I'm a Notre Dame fan, all of that. That has nothing to do with it. It has to do with analyzing the 2 games before that they played Ohio State and analyzing this game. And I think Notre Dame wins this game.
Vince, so you have Georgia versus Notre Dame, the title game. Here's mine. I have Texas versus Notre Dame, Oregon versus Georgia.
5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, as I said, I had all the lower
Crazy.
seeds winning, and I didn't want to do it because I'm like, that's just crazy. But that's like you said, that's where the matchups kind of led me. Oregon, Georgia, I already explained it, kind of in your breakdown of that matchup. The Masters usually wins that battle. And I think this is going to be a year of progress for Dan Lanning, but also a year of we're not there yet.
Sure.
In my opinion. And, I think of that Georgia defensive line and Michael Williams and those guys kind of getting after it. They're one of the few D lines that I think can have success against Oregon's offensive line. And so I think at the end of the day, Georgia wins in a very competitive game that's going to have a lot more scoring than the Georgia-Ohio State game is going to have. Not like 40 to 40-something to 40-something, but in the 30s is kind of where I see that game being played. The Texas-Notre Dame game is very interesting, Vince, and I'm going to be honest with you. Actually, I have this wrong. Now that I look at it, I have this wrong. So it should be actually Texas and Georgia and Notre Dame and Oregon. So I actually have my card wrong.
Gotcha.
So I'm gonna have to kind of rethink this a little bit. I'm gonna actually get this card right. So I'm gonna make the card correct, and then I'm gonna put up the new card so I don't look like an idiot. And we'll get this correct as I'm explaining it. But
that's so funny.
yeah, I'm looking at it, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. So let me get this card correct, and then I'm gonna to get this new card here, Vince. So just give me 1 second because it's gonna confuse me the entire time I'm talking about it.
Yeah,
So,
it will confuse me as well.
Yeah. So let's get this card up there and make this one correct, right? So let's go there and go zoom to fit. And we're all set. All right. So that's more like it. So completely ignore everything I just said. Texas, Georgia, same deal though. I think Texas is going to have the firepower to score on Georgia a little bit, but at the end of the day, I just think Georgia is going to be the better team in the trenches. I think Texas matches up better against Georgia than does Oregon. But here's the problem. Georgia will have, what do I always say about rematches between good teams? Georgia will have lost at Texas in the regular season. That's why partly why Georgia's not a semifinal team, right? I mean, excuse me, a conference champion, a bye team. I just don't think you can. I just think teams struggle to win rematches, and I think Georgia wins the rematch. I've been consistent about rematches, right? And that's why I even said with your Notre Dame Florida State rematch, that makes me very nervous. Now, of course, in recent years, a lot of rematches have resulted in the same team winning.
Sure.
But that's been primarily in the Pac-12. That's primarily what's happened, where Utah beat USC twice and then Utah beat Oregon twice. A lot of other leagues, the rematch usually doesn't work out well unless there's a big gap between teams. Like the year that Oklahoma beat TCU twice, they were a way better team than TCU was. The other year, I think it was 19 when Texas beat Oklahoma in the regular season, then Oklahoma won the rematch. I think it was 18 or 19 when that happened. So I'm going Georgia still here. So my title game card will not have to change. 7, Oregon versus number 6, Notre Dame. That is going to be a very interesting battle. And this Oregon team, to me, is going to be a tough out for Notre Dame, a very tough matchup for Notre Dame. But at the end of the day, I think Notre Dame's got the better quarterback. And there's a lot of talk about how good Oregon's receivers are. I think that's going to get put to the test because, again, it's what I said in the last round. Notre Dame has one of the few teams, or excuse me, the first round against Ole Miss. Notre Dame has one of the few defenses that have the athletes on the perimeter to say they can run with Oregon's receivers. And Notre Dame is, for the last 2 years, has gone against some of the best quarterbacks and the best receivers in college football, and they've not only held their own, they've usually won those matchups. And I think that's the case here. Oregon's line play would concern me. It's not quite as good as it's been in recent years, but it's concerning. The big matchup that would make me nervous in this game is the Oregon defensive line against the Notre Dame offensive line. But if Notre Dame's in the semifinals, then their offensive line has figured some things out. That's kind of the way I look at it. And so I have Notre Dame still winning this matchup, even though it's a little different matchup than I originally had listed. So,
okay. Yep. So your national championship is Notre Dame and Georgia, and my national championship is Notre Dame and Georgia.
Yeah. That's the one thing we had in common.
Yeah. Well, and I was real close to moving Texas into the next round, but either way, we both have the same national championship game, which is, yeah, there you go. I have Georgia as a 1 seed. You have Georgia as an 8 seed.
Right.
We both
made the
have
card
Notre
a little
Dame.
tough. I was like, you know what? I'm not making 2 cards. We got the same team.
Well, there's no point. I mean, there's no point, right? And we both have Notre Dame as a 6 seed. And so it's Georgia and Notre Dame in the championship. Georgia coming from the top of the bracket, Notre Dame coming from the bottom of the bracket. This is an all-out matchup right here. I mean, you've got 2 blue blood programs and all of these different things. And at the end of the day, I just had a hard time having Notre Dame win this game. I had Georgia winning the game, Notre Dame getting to the championship and losing to the Bulldogs. As much as I would love for Notre Dame to win this game, I couldn't take them another step at this point.
Yeah.
And so I do have Notre Dame falling to Georgia and Georgia winning it all.
I'm going full homer mode.
Yeah, baby.
I can't help it, man. Like, I'm sitting there like, dude, I'm going to have them losing the semis. Nope. I don't like those matchups. I can't do it, man. You know what? I do this every year. I'm just going to do this. Screw it, man. I'm going to have some fun today. I'm going full homer today, Vince.
Nice.
And I'm saying Notre Dame wins. But here's the practical reasons why I say that, in all honesty, because I just couldn't do it. I wanted to not pick them, but I just couldn't do it. This is my fandom kicking in with them winning. Like I said before, guys, we're having some fun here. Okay, we're having some fun here. Real analysis is Notre Dame's got to prove they can beat teams like Oregon. They got to prove they can beat teams like Georgia.
Sure.
Right? That's the reality of the analysis. But again, like I said, I'm having some fun here. And if you can't have fun on a show like this, then you just take yourself way too seriously.
It's your show, baby.
I'm not talking about you, Vince. We had some fun together. I'm just telling people why I'm going here. I'm just going to have some fun with it, right?
Right.
But in seriousness, though, yes, they have a lot to prove. But when I look at this matchup, Vince, and everybody says, Notre Dame's never beat Georgia. Well, first of all, they've only played each other 3 times. The first time was back in 1980, and Georgia had this guy named Herschel Walker. Okay, they don't have Herschel Walker in this team. The last 2 times they've played, Notre Dame has had the ball in the 4th quarter with less than 2 minutes to go with a chance to win the game. Both times they've played. First time was in 17 when Georgia was the national runners-up. Notre Dame had the ball multiple times in the 4th quarter with a chance to take a lead and win the game. Notre Dame had the ball in Georgia territory with less than 2 minutes to go at Georgia in 2019 and couldn't get it done. I think this team gets it done. They're very similar in style. Cincinnati also, with Mike Denbrock and Marcus Freeman as their coordinators, played Georgia in the Peach Bowl and took them down to the wire. That was another game. So, this is a staff that is very familiar with Georgia. And I just feel when I look at this football team, Vince, that was the 2020 season, by the way. Cincinnati lost to Georgia 24-21. I do actually, in all seriousness, think this is a matchup that Notre Dame can keep competitive. I do. I think at the end of the day, teams like Georgia have had Bama, when they play real mobile quarterbacks, they have some issues. That's basically where it comes down to. And I think Notre Dame having a dynamic quarterback, that's the one thing they didn't have, is a dynamic quarterback that could throw in either of those two matchups. Brandon Wimbush was a dynamic runner, couldn't make the throws when he needed to make the throws. And the receivers couldn't make drops. I mean, last time Notre Dame had a chance to play them, they had guys like Lawrence Keys and Tony Jones Jr. and good solid football players, Chris Fink, that were their starters. They're going to have much better weapons now. The first time they played, Notre Dame's starting receiving core was Freddie Canteen, Cameron Smith, and Equinemi St. Brown. It's a little different animal at Notre Dame now. And Georgia's a different animal too. So just like I said, having some fun with it. I just, at the end of the day, couldn't pick against Notre Dame, Vince. That's really what it comes down to. My fandom won out over my analyst hat in this one, Vince. I'm just going to be honest with you. But I do think, as you stated, this is going to be a good matchup. And Georgia has not dominated Northern teams outside of Michigan in the last 5 years. They haven't. I mean, good ones, right? Ohio State took them down to the wire. Notre Dame took them down to the wire twice. Cincinnati took them down to the wire in 2020 in the Peach Bowl. So, because why? Northern teams tend to have a little bit more physical line play. And that's been able to somewhat give them a chance to be competitive against a team like Georgia.
Sure.
So you know what? I had some fun with it. And I just, at the end of the day, I couldn't do it. And I'll say this, it's not just me though. There was a segment on ESPN today where they asked Heather Dinich.
I saw that tweet, but I haven't listened to it yet.
Title, and she made the case for why Notre Dame can win a championship, and everything she said, I'm like, yeah, it makes sense. At the end of the day, I could not do it. I could not do it. There's so many millions of things that Notre Dame has to prove between now and then. Sure. I get all that.
Oh, sure.
But you know what? Have a little bit of fun, man.
Yeah, man.
And then we're going to find out here in about 2.5 weeks what Notre Dame is made of. Because like if they can go on the road and beat an SEC team and look good doing it, then they'll have a shot. If they can't, then all this is for naught. But I just, at the end of the day, Vince, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
I love it. I love where your heart's at. I love where your head's at. I hope it's true because it's going to be awesome. I mean, let's go. Let's have some fun with it. Okay, so that's going to do it for this segment of the show. Thanks for hanging out with us and taking and going on our journey through the college football playoff. Look, whether Brian's comes true, mine comes true, or neither one of us comes true, it's going to be fun. The playoff is going to be a lot of fun. And I know people push back on it, but I think the playoff is going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to get a lot of things answered.
I sure did. You're a big reason why I'm a big fan of the playoff now, Vince. Yeah. I mean, when we had the show together, I was pissed about it. And you're like, dude, hear me out now. And I was like, you know what? That's a great point, Vince. And now I'm kind of like, it's not my ideal scenario.
Sure.
But I like it better than the 4-team playoff.
Right. No,
I still think my scenario is best. Get your Final Four after the bowl games. Go back to the old bowl tie-ins. Pick your Final Four after the bowl games. That's still my favorite way of doing it. But you know what? Outside of that, I like the 12 a lot better than I like the 4.
We're gonna get a lot of things answered. You know what I mean? Like how do they really go about doing the seeding? What conferences are gonna be? What are they gonna lean towards? What kind of advantage is it to get the 5 seed, for example, and not have to necessarily for Notre Dame not to have to play in a conference championship game? And how do they treat losers of the conference championship games? A lot of questions I think we all have, and we're going to get those answered to a degree. We're going to need a few more years, I think, of data before we really know. But at the same time, I'm really looking forward to December 20th through like the middle of January. There's going to be a lot of really good football at the end of the day, and that's really what I'm looking forward to. So thanks for hanging out with us. Stick around. We are going to do a mailbag to finish things up. But before we get to that, make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, share with your family and friends. And of course, as the scroll goes along the bottom, make sure you jump on the boards@irishbreakdown.com. You can take the discussion that we just had over to the boards. I bet there'd be a lot of fun with that. Maybe we'll have to put together a graphic showing, our thoughts and just let people have at us over there on the board. I think that might be a lot of fun too. So make sure you get on the boards. A lot of good discussion, a lot of good intel, good stuff happening over on the boards. That's boards.irishbreakdown.com.